The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the participants. The hosts make no claim to be literary experts, and their opinions are exactly that, opinions. All creative works discussed or reviewed are the intellectual property of the creators of said stories and is being used under the fair use doctrine.
Welcome to Of Swords and Soulmates, a podcast where we discuss reminisce stories. Today we have with us Jonathan.
Oh, whoa, that was way too early in this. Oh my goodness, I'm Jonathan. Also with us is Kelly.
Hey, it's Kelly. And of course, we also have Ashley.
Hey guys, it's Ashley.
And I'm Mari. And today we're going to be discussing Oak King, Holly King by Sebastian Nothwell. But first, getting into some news. I had a few things to talk about. First thing is that Fairyloot just very recently announced they're doing a special exclusive edition of When the Moon Hatched, which I haven't read, but I keep hearing really amazing things about. Have you guys heard of it?
What's Fairyloot?
Sorry.
In a video game,
like...
if you kill a fairy, that's what they drop.
That's... Oh, okay.
So Fairyloot is kind of like a Lumicrate and Owlcrate. They're basically subscription services where you subscribe and every month you get, like they usually have different options. They have like a book-only option or like a book and goodies option. So it could be like book-related things you get in your mystery box.
So there's
and you
no
don't know
murder.
which book you're getting. You're just subscribing to it. And they're like exclusive, really pretty editions. A lot of times they're signed with cool covers and things like that.
Huh, that seems interesting. Is this a subscription service?
Yeah.
Yes.
How much is it?
It can be costly.
Like Wine of the Month Club, except book
I don't think it's
Stuffs of
too
the
much
Month
if you're
Club?
doing just the book. Like I want to say it's in like the 30-something or maybe 40-something at the most. But the problem with Fairyloot is the problem with a lot of these subscription services. There is a high demand. And so you have to get on this waiting list to get into the subscription when they have one open. And then when they do have one open, you then have to be ready, like watching your email 24/7 and jump on getting into the subscription service as soon as it's open.
So what you got to do is Instagram stalk somebody who is in there and then call their boss and open a fake HR claim against them. So when they lose their job, they have to decide between food and Fairyloot. And once they make that decision, you pounce.
I mean, that's one way.
Today's episode is brought to you by Unethical Life Hack Tips.
Don't ask questions.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. That's cool. I'm going to start a subscription service.
Well, see, I have the Lumicrate service, book only, and I forget the name of the other one. It's like book binding or something. It's a British one, but I've got two of them. With Owlcrate, I started off with the only subscription I could get into, which was like the whole box. So it was like the book and then all these tchotchkes like mirrors and tea and like boxes and bookmarks and all this, which was fine, but not all of it was for stuff that I particularly liked. And not all of it was stuff that I would particularly use. So like I gave some of it away to people I thought who would enjoy it. But then when I was able to get into the book only subscription for Owlcrate, that's what I have now, is just the book only. So I don't have Fairyloot, but they do a thing like a lot of these subscription services do where like they have an edition that they're announced and it'll be available to their subscribers. And then after like on certain day. And then after that, like the next day, it'll be available to the general public for whatever they have left.
Oh, so we could just pick up the scraps.
Mm-hmm. Right. So starting June 7th at 4 p.m. BST, which I had to look up is British summertime, you could subscribe. I mean, not subscribe, but you can, if they have any left, you can get their special edition of When the Moon Hatched, which is a reminisce story with dragons and magic that is very well reviewed, but I've not read it yet, so I can't say that it's great. I've just heard good things about it.
I downloaded it. It is on Kindle Unlimited.
Right, it is, yes.
And I didn't get past I'm such an idiot. What is it called when they're like explaining the names and the terms and things like, is it the glossary?
I think it is glossary, yeah.
The glossary is like a dictionary definition where the index is just like, here's the page this word or phrase was used.
Oh, no. So it was a glossary. I had it right on the first time. So the glossary was extensive. I feel like that guy was like 7, 8, 10 pages long. It was long.
Oof.
And I got so lost in trying to learn the glossary. And there's chatter about it too, like that it's not necessary to like dive into or learn it ahead of time. Like you'll figure it out as you go. But yeah, there is a lot of hype surrounding this book and people love it.
Yeah.
On like Book Talk and everything. There's a lot of chatter.
I'll probably read it Kindle Unlimited first, and if I like it, I'll probably buy the book. Sarah A. Parker is the author. The edition that Fairyloot is doing is like blue and turquoise and white with like holographic foil. It's really pretty. The other news thing I had was T. Kingfisher, my favorite authors, has a book coming out this year called A Sorceress Comes to Call. It's going to be released August 6th of this year, and it's a fairy tale retelling of the Goose Girl from Brothers Grimm. If you pre-order it before it's released and then you submit to Tor Books a receipt that you've pre-ordered it, wherever you've pre-ordered it, so long as supplies last, you get a free art print, a free 5x7 art print that's actually really pretty. Ooh. It kind of looks like it's black with like a white unicorn that you see in a lot of places. I know it's probably a big art piece, but I can't think of the name of it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
About the unicorn rests in the garden. It's like the unicorn kind of like sitting down, kind of.
Yes, yeah. So it kind of looks like that, but it's not a unicorn. Yeah. It's a white horse, and I mean in the 5x7 art print that they're doing, it's a white horse, but it definitely gives me the vibes of that unicorn tapestry. Anyways, it's free. If you're going to pre-order it, might as well get the little free 5x7 art print from the Tor book, which I thought was really kind of neat. And I really like T. Kingfisher. I recommend her. I like her fairy tale retellings, and I like her reminisce books. This is a fairy tale retelling kind of like the last fairy tale retelling she did was, oh my god, I blanked out the name. Is it Nettle and Rose? Nettle and Thorn?
Is it? But that's a series, right? The Nettle and Bone series?
No.
Or no?
Nettle and Bone is not a series. And it is Nettle and Bone. That's the name I was trying to remember. Yeah, Nettle and Bone is a standalone. The Saints of Steel is the series, the Reminisce series. Nettle and Bone's the one with like the nun in the magical nun who's off to save her sister from the evil prince, and she creates a bone dog as her companion. It's a good book. It's weird and dark, like a lot of T. Kingfisher stuff.
Are you laughing at the weird part? Like which part was funny for you?
Bone dog. At first I was like, that sounds super Disney.
Yeah, she's got her companions are a bone dog, a possessed rooster, and a witch. And they're all off to like save her sister.
I'm back to Disney on
I'm
this.
just saying, like that does sound like Disney.
This sounds like Moana, or as your sister says it, Moana.
So the bone dog's in Coco, but the rooster is, and there is some witchery happening.
Yeah. Because doesn't Nana become like a stingray who can like guide your life or something like that? Yeah,
there's some witchery.
Yeah, is that a word?
Question. No question.
To the Googles. Spell it.
Why are you not using the supercomputer that fits in your hand?
It kind of reminds me of Kelly. What's that? The darker age of Disney. Was it the Cauldron? What was the name of that
Cauldron?
movie?
You're talking about the Black Cauldron?
The Black Cauldron. Like, I think it's kind of like a little bit of Black Cauldron vibes. If we're going to Disneyfy it, it would be like that era of Disney.
Interesting.
How do you spell cauldron?
Cauldron.
So you're telling me, Jonathan, as somebody who likes Disney, you have never seen the Black Cauldron?
I like Disney. I don't like everything that Disney does. Like, I like my wife, but I don't like everything she does.
All right, well. The Black Cauldron was a Disney animated movie made in the 80s where Disney was attempting to break the mold that they only made super family-friendly, funny, sing-along animated movies. So they made one that was a little bit darker. It was intended to be like a little bit more like PG rated. So it was from a series of books about Tarn, which was like a fantasy setting, where the entire gist of the story is there's a lowly assistant pig tender, pig farmer type guy who is entrusted with this magic pig that can see the future, and the big bad evil force in the land is wanting to get that pig because of its oracle powers. And so, of course, all kinds of crazy things ensue, but there was a lot of like very dark undertones, and a lot of kids, when they went and saw it, were scared out of their mind because it was so dark compared to other Disney movies. Kind of like, think about like some of the scariest sequences from like The Dark Crystal, and that's kind of what you had. So
Kelly, we don't talk about Muppets in this house.
So Disney took a big PR hit from that movie being dark and sinister-y, and for a while it got relegated deep into the vaults of Disney, with many people thinking it was never going to ever be re-released or seen from again. But eventually it did get back out. But yeah, for a while that Black Cauldron was thought of as a Disney mistake because of how it departed from their previous animated movies, which I liked it because it was such a interesting movie and all. But yeah, Disney took a big hit on that one.
Yeah, but if T. Kingfisher wrote a Disney movie, it would definitely be that type of Disney movie.
Yeah, I mean, basically imagine a Disney movie, you had like zombies and that kind of stuff, dark magic and zombies, and it was very disturbing, especially for the 80s. Like, for kids in the 80s, that was something disturbing to see, especially coming from Disney.
Was that the Michael Eisner era?
Right, so that was the whole him trying to break the mold of what the stereotypical, what Disney is and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, so like a lot of us that saw it as kids thought we'd never see it again because Disney hated it so much and took such a big hit on it that we thought they were, most people thought they were just going to bury it and it would never be seen from again. Because, this was before you had wide release of VHS at home and stuff like that. So if Disney had never re-released it or dug it back out of the archives, it would never see the light of day again. Except for maybe if you got some weird bootleg of it, kind of like Song of the South. That is a Disney movie that will never see the light of day again.
Yeah. Yeah, it looks like if that was like an 85 movie, I think it's right around the turn when he
took over. Yeah.
When Eisner took over there, like early 80s for him. Interesting.
Yeah, that was a very dark Disney animated movie for sure.
But it's a good one.
It's worth watching because it is a good movie. It's just, it is definitely not a young kid movie.
Noted. I tried to get Ashley to watch the mildly racist, what's the one I tried to get with the Donald Duck and Three Caballeros or whatever?
Oh, Three Caballeros?
Yeah, it's like, we didn't even get to the meat of that one. And she was like, you care if I go watch like The Handmaid's Tale in the bedroom? She was like already exiting. So I was like, all right, we'll just watch something else. Yeah, I can't even choke those things down anymore.
Well, it's like trying to watch some of the old Tom and Jerry movies, even some of like the Disney animated shorts that were made as war propaganda. It can be considered very offensive now, but just like anything else, you have to remember the context of the time it was made. That doesn't make it right, but knowing the context of society and what things were going on gives a little bit more understanding of why it was made, how it got made.
Yeah, it's good to be used as a tool for like talking about what was going on in the world at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the goofy shorts. Like that's kind of like, that's my cup of tea. Like,
yeah, we don't want to learn nothing in this house.
Yeah, screw that. Let me just figure out how not to smash myself with a tennis racket. Hopefully, yeah. You know what we tried to watch the other day, and I just couldn't do it? Was that cartoon about DuckTales? Boom, woo! Yeah, it was much cooler when I was like 9.
Well, yeah, I mean everything was much cooler when you look back on it. I mean, you don't appreciate, especially the 80s animated shows where they were all extremely formulaic and very uncreative when you think about it. Like they all had the same exact plot. It's like He-Man had the same exact plot for every episode. Problem, Prince Adam tries to solve it, can't solve it. He has to get the sword out, has to say the magic words, becomes He-Man, solves the problem. That was every episode.
And what did we learn from that? Or how you solve the problem. Why did everybody go silent? My headphones on?
Yeah.
No one's talking?
Nope.
When you have the power and then it grows and then you fix everything. That's how nobody's on board with that. Huh. Okay. And Skeletor, which brings us right back to Bone Dog.
Okay. Moving on.
Yes, let's move on.
Moving on. The only other little news tidbit I had, because, so many of the books we've read have been because of the author list from that fabled fantasy romantasy book event happening in October in Orlando, they did announce that they are having a venue change. So they were going to be at and it's still on their website, it's the B Resort, is where everything had been, but it's going to be changing to another venue. I mean, everything, all the tickets and everything are still the same. Everything is being honored, but people who had signed up for it got emails about that. So apparently it's a place closer to Disney Springs. All right, so moving on from the news bit onto the book that we picked to read. June is LGBTQ plus Pride Month, and we opted to read a book by Sebastian Nothwell, who's an author who writes queer romance. Actually, let me start off. I did note that it was published February 14th of 2022. All right, so the synopsis. Shrike, the Butcher of Blackthorn, is a legendary warrior of the Fey realms. When he wins a tournament in the court of the Silver Wheel, its queen names him her Oak King, a figurehead destined to die in a ritual duel to invoke the change of seasons. Shrike is determined to survive, even if it means he must put his heart, as well as his life, into a mere mortal's hand. Wren Lofthouse, a London clerk, has long ago resigned himself to a life of tedium and given up his fanciful dreams. When a medieval-looking brute arrives at his office to murmur of destiny, he's inclined to think his old enemies are playing an elaborate prank. Still, he can't help feeling intrigued by the bizarre yet handsome stranger and his fantastical ramblings, whose presence stirs up emotions Wren has tried to lock away in the withered husk of his heart. As Shrike whisks Wren away to a world of wild hunts and arcane rites, Wren is freed from the repercussions of Victorian society, from the repression of Victorian society. But both the Fae and mortal realms prove treacherous to their growing bond. Wren and Shrike must fight side by side to see who will claim victory, Oak King or Holly King.
Ooh.
So what did you guys think?
Me first. There was so much eloquence. I thought with the care the author took in describing almost every single detail, it almost felt like poetry to me. I don't know if you guys got, but everything was an adjective. And she's a thick book, right? Like this book was well over 500 pages. So I really enjoyed this book. It was a bit long for my taste, just because all of our TBRs are so deep, right? And I thought there were a couple of corners cut that I really would have liked to have dived into, but overall I thought the story, there were adventures, there was always something going on, their care and feelings for each other. It was really poetic to me. I liked it.
How many stars you giving it?
I don't think we're there yet.
I thought we were rating.
Are we there yet?
Yeah.
Oh.
Boom, boom, boom. Pay attention,
My bad,
Ashley.
guys. This was a 3.5 for me.
Whoa, hold on. What do you mean a 3.5? What's wrong with you? I give it more.
How many stars would you give it?
I'm rolling with a solid 4.
You're going with a 4.
I'm going with a 4. It had words, it had imagery, it had stuffs. From what I consumed, wait, don't laugh. It was, shut your face. I like that story. It's a good story. I'm going to give it a 4.
Kelly, what do you think?
I really enjoyed this book. I think the story was very well written. I think there was a lot of great imagery. I think overall everything gelled really well together. The author did an amazing job of blending in real historical events into the background of the story, which helped make it feel that much more realistic. There was a lot of very clever use of imagery, some symbolism, I think, and a lot of tie-in to how society functioned in that time period. And then I liked how he brought in Court of the Fae, and you got the two worlds effect. This book was easily a 4 overall.
I think for me, I enjoyed this book a good bit. It was a chunky one, but I very much enjoyed the prose, the writing style. I don't read a lot of historical fiction because I find that most authors write in a very modern voice and just put their characters in like old-timey costumes, and it feels like cosplay as opposed to like being really involved in the time or immersed in the time. And I feel like the way he wrote descriptions and the way he wrote the characters and how they spoke, it felt very much of the time that we were supposed to be in. I liked the cozy, romantic kind of fantasy meets Jane Austen meets like the dark, fey, goblin-y world of like Holly Black or Labyrinth. And I liked that there was equally as much interesting stuff going on plot-wise in the fey world as the quote-unquote real world. For me, it was a 4.5.
Solid.
Now, I want to just have us go through the other topics that we generally rate on and just give our rating with no real discussion, just kind of our rating. And then we'll get into the spoilery part and we can do discussions. That way people who haven't read the book and want a full rating before we get to spoiler part can have an idea of what we think.
Fair
You guys
enough.
down for that?
So for fantasy, I think this was easily a solid 4. The only reason I don't think I went much higher than that would be because it did pull on some of the classics of other stories and other works about the Fae realm. But overall, I think it incorporated everything very well.
Okay, so for fantasy, I did 4.5 because I thought the world was very well fleshed out. And I felt like I was in a Fae world that had existed for a long time. I felt like there were stories within stories.
For the fantasy, I'm going to give it a 3. I'll leave it at that. Ash.
Fantasy, I was immersed. I definitely felt the two worlds, the presence of the two worlds. I have questions. And so for that reason, it's a 4.
What's the next category, Kelly?
So it'll be romance. And why don't you start, Maury?
So for romance, I went with a 4.5. I thought that there was strong devotion to each other.
I also went with a 4.5.
I agree. Same. I was on that 4.5 range as well. Ash.
I would definitely agree with a 4. I felt in that poetry mind frame, like I felt the devotion, the passion. So that was a 4 for me as well, yes.
What's next, Kelly? Is it spice?
Spice.
All right, Jonathan?
Oh, I got a lot of thoughts on spice.
We just need the numbers.
Oh,
sir.
5. Kelly, what'd you think? Spice-wise. Give me your spice number. Spicify me.
So I kind of went with a 4. And the reason I went with a 4 is because I feel like I don't know since I haven't read a lot of romantasy, I don't know what expectations are.
Okay. I like it.
Ash, what did you think?
Internally, I'm laughing because of the boys.
Yes.
But sorry. I thought it was all very appropriate, right? There wasn't anything super crazy that happened. They weren't like, it wasn't happening every other chapter kind of thing. It was very well paced. I'd say 3.5. There was definitely some spice happening.
That's exactly what I put. 3.5. Literally, I put about expected. About as expected is what I wrote down.
Kelly, I think they're trying to tell us that we're prudes.
No, I think it's just
No.
that we don't have as much exposure to this romantasy stuff as they do, so we have a different frame of reference.
You guys have a different benchmark.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah, that's...
If all you've ever done is drive around the neighborhood in a 35-mile-an-hour zone, then 55 miles an hour seems excessively fast to you. But if you're used to driving NASCAR, then 55 miles an hour seems incredibly slow. So it's all perspective.
Sorry. I think, well, so let's set that bar. Like a 5, like a spice rating of 4 or 5 has shocking it. Realizing like
I was going off of like quantity and quality.
that's a very male response, I think.
Yeah.
Like
Sorry.
you're just going off of like shock and awe.
I think everything was appropriate and of a good quality. I don't know
It was
that
well
I have.
balanced.
I don't know that I have a good perspective, not having read so much romantasy, of what's the normal amount of spice
I mean, I
you
think
would
this
see.
is about normal. It's about average. To me, like a five spice situation is like Katie Roberts' books. Or like, I can never remember if it's CM or CS Nascosta. Like, those books are a lot of sex, a lot of descriptive sex, a lot of creative, it's a lot of monster romance kind of stuff. Like, that's where the 5 thing is. It's like, that is a mainstay of what you're getting when you read that story.
So what you're saying is, I mean, my thinking is something is too much when there's more sex than there is, right? Like, that's just too much Too much spice is when there's more spice than there is plot and moving a plot forward.
I think it depends on what you're there for. I think that if something is marketed as, great, epic fantasy or story or something, and it has more spice than it does actual plot, then yeah, that would be too much. But I think that if what you're getting into is a spicy story from the get-go, if it's described that way, if it's marketed that way, and it meets, I think to me, I guess it's about expectations. If it meets the expectations of how it's marketed and you know what you're getting into, expectations are met. But if you're expecting something like Lord of the Rings, and you get neon gods or something, it's going to be a little too spicy. If you're expecting white rice and you get that like high-end Indian food, it's going to be a bit of a shock to the system. But if you order that high-end Indian food, then you expect it to be spicy,
So from this point forward, dear listeners, we will be discussing the book in question with spoilers. So if you do not wish to be spoiled, then you can stop the podcast here and go read the book and then come back and listen once you have finished reading it. Or if you don't care about spoilers because you don't have any intention on reading this book, or you just don't care about spoilers in general, feel free to continue listening.
Good job, Kelly.
So what did you guys, do you want to go into any more detail on the stars before we get into the other details as far as spoilery stuff?
I don't know. Do the boys need more clarification on spice? How you guys feeling about that talk? Because I feel like we all explained it the same way with different words. I think Mari voiced very similar perspectives that I did. There's shock value. There's what makes you like squirm in your seat, like you're excited for what's happening.
When it comes to spice, I may have a different threshold than you, but I thought
it's a very polite, spicy book.
Yeah,
Mari and I gave it 3.5.
It made me want to play with some swords.
And I think too, like we had said, your opinion, your rating of something can change over time. Maybe you look back on this book after a year of reading other romantasy books and you decide that maybe you would rate it differently now.
Yeah, I am hoping to do a reread of this one in the future. 'Cause I think he has plans for like or Kickstarter for like audio book, right?
Yeah, I was going to say that. So he didn't give me a date in the conversation we had, but he did say that sometime in late June that the audiobook should be available.
That's good.
Yeah, so are you saying that I missed this thing by like 4 weeks?
Yeah.
Son of a I would have liked this in an audiobook for concentration.
Yeah, for the listeners who have not been on this entire podcast journey with us to date, Jonathan is our designated audiobook, very strongly prefers audiobooks. He very much attempted to be clever with this novel and get it converted to audio, and it just wasn't cohesive in the ways that in the programs that we had available to us in the time that we did. So
I hopscotched around the book, where it could work, and I kept losing track of where I was.
One of the things I really enjoyed about the book was, like I said in the non-spoiler section, was his use of real historical events that were occurring. So 1816 was in fact the year without a summer. That was an actual historical event.
Was it because of the smog and stuff?
Maybe, but the characters alluded to it in the book, and that was in fact a real thing, which was then explained in the context of the story. And, that whole concept of the rebirth and the Winter King and Summer King is a very old Fae type of story. So that's been around. That idea of that has been around for a while. So there was nothing really new with that. It was just an interesting.
I was going to ask that
it.
because it felt like I have vaguely heard about stuff like that through like pagan friends and things.
Yeah, there's a lot of different variations on it. The idea that the king and the queen of Fae die in the winter or hibernate in the winter and they're reborn in the spring, or that there's a winter king who slays the summer king and all that stuff. There's tons of variations on it, just like any fairy tale. There's also a lot of other interesting things that went on in the book that were, historical, and a lot of allusions to different icons and things like the Green Man pub that they talked about quite frequently. That is a iconic UK pub. There's several of them, but it's a very iconic thing that has been around in London since God knows how long, probably the 1400s or something ridiculous. And of course, the Green Man is also pagan fae type issue too. And then he tied in a lot of the legends of like Gawain and the Green Knight.
Right.
He tied back into the Red Cross Knight or Sir Gregory and the Bear. So he tied in a lot of other Arthurian medieval
Lore.
fantasy legends and lore together. So he all tied a lot of that in together, which I thought was very interesting. And then it was just a very well thought out and crafted approach to everything. I mean, even like throwing in the Peasants' Revolt, which was, a huge historical event that happened in the 1300s, late 1300s during the plague years. That event in itself was some would say it's not as big of a deal, but some historians would say it was kind of a pivotal deal during the early reign of King Richard, and it helped shape his rulership because he, initially promised to give in to the peasants in their popular uprising, then turn around and betrayed them. So there was a lot of really cool things and historical things that he drew into it that I very much enjoyed.
I thought it was interesting how, like, in the parts where they're in the Fey world, it makes you feel the danger of the Fey world, the danger of death, the danger of, you can't be careful what you say and what you promise, what you will do. But then also equally when they were in the real world, the fact that homosexuality was a death sentence made it feel just as dangerous, just as scary.
Right, because we had a reference to Pratt and Smith, which was at the time, because I think it was Shrike talked about it, or Wren talked about it. So it was the last two people who were killed or were executed for sodomy. And of course, there's a lot now looking back on it. Historians have figured out there was a lot of shady things that happened with that whole trial and, probably a lot of bogus things that went on. And it may have not even happened and they may have actually not been guilty. And one of the things, too, is like even Dickens, at the time, Dickens went and saw these men in prison. So that was a huge deal. That was like a huge deal.
Kelly, you got a lot of like UK
history is one of Kelly's jams.
I mean, European history is not my forte by any means, but I did take quite a few classes on it.
It's pretty cool. How did you feel about how the story kicked off and how the kind of like the introduction to the idea of murder season?
I thought that it was a really pretty good introduction to what type of Fae story this was going to be. Because there are different kinds of fairy tales. There's fairy tales where everything is Tinkerbell and cute, or, sexy dudes with wings or whatever. But then there's fairy tales where the tooth fairy will slaughter your entire family if you don't give it your teeth, where it is dark. And it pretty much sets up that there's a price to be paid, and that price will be your life kind of story. That it's not a clean and sparkling version of fairy. That there's darkness to be had.
So one of the places that I kind of started to veer off course in this book was like how they came together. So like when I was reading it, I was thinking like, all right, so here's this dude, he's getting all kind of fighty, and then he comes across this regulation dude and they like realize an attraction. Apparently I missed something with an acorn.
Yeah, so Shrike, basically they were brought together by fate or by magic. Because Shrike did the acorn to try and find out what was going to help him, what was going to aid him in this task that he had to do. And it took him to Wren. Now for Wren, you have this, I very much like almost instantly identified with Wren. You have this bored cubicle worker longing for like fantasy and excitement, doodling in the sidelines of his numerical pages, and all of a sudden in walks this Fae person bringing romance and fantasy and escapism and excitement into his life. Like, I understand why Wren fell, why he was intrigued right away.
Well, of course, I mean, that's a very classic fantasy, and just in fiction in general, the whole idea of the everyday person being thrust into the role of a, extraordinary.
Yeah, I like that. I like when there are pathways kind of carved out for transition from like a normie up into something a little more special.
I like too that Ren wasn't anything. I mean, nothing against the character, but he was ordinary, right? He wasn't super buff. He wasn't extremely tall. He wasn't the best of his field. He was just an everyday guy doing an everyday job, just getting through it, right? Like his dreams didn't pan out the way that he thought they would. His family wasn't supportive because of something that went down. He was on his own. He didn't have any friends. The friend group he thought he had, sold him out. They didn't support him when everything went sideways. So it was a very realistic, story of someone whose life is going to change dramatically. And that's kind of how most fantasy readers would hope it would happen, right? Someone just walks in, you're the one that's going to help me solve this problem. What do you mean? This has got to be a joke, right?
Yeah, you're the chosen
There's
one.
no way.
Yeah, you're the special one. Absolutely.
You're the special one. And all of that to say, there wasn't anything special about Ren except that he was chosen and that they had this bond. And so I really loved that part of the story. There was a lot of very poetic world building. There was a lot of attention to detail for each individual character and how their relationship bloomed. And I don't even mean that in the romantic one. That could just be the friendship one, right? So I really enjoyed that part of the story. It's what convinced me to finish.
I think there were two things early on that kind of helped me get the taste or the vibe of the book that I thought was really cool. One was like when Shrike came into London and he talked about feeling like the poison of the iron in the air, and the idea that like the really bad smog pollution situation that London had in that time period was so bad that the Fae were affected, because it's, traditionally the Fae have a weakness to iron. That's like a very traditional Fae story thing. So like when Shrike first came to London, it said he stumbled to his knees onto close-cropped grass. His flailing hand braced against a sapling to keep himself upright as he dry heaved. Iron hung in the air itself. Its heavy ache seemed to fly at him from all directions. It just definitely gave me that image right away that modern day or that time period London was instantly hostile. The other thing that got me like right away, I was so excited. I was like, I need to talk to somebody about this, was like page 55. There was a reference to Hieronymus Bosch. Do you guys know Hieronymus Bosch? Do you recognize that name? Do you know who it is?
Do you think I know who it is? Just a quick poll of the room. Like, are we? I just want to see, like, if you were like, hey, one of these people know who it is. Do you think that is me? I don't know. I'll tell you if you're right or wrong.
You may have seen it. You may not know the name, but Hieronymus Bosch was an artist who did these crazy scenes, like heaven and hell and like bird people, and like during the time period when all the other contemporary authors were doing like Virgin Mary and angels and whatever, Hieronymus Bosch was doing this super crazy surrealistic stuff. Like it was like you're putting together people from two different eras is the way it looks, and it looks just as weird, just as crazy in person. It's got all his work has a lot of detail. I saw a lot of Hieronymus Bosch's stuff in the Prado Museum, and you could just stand there in front of that stuff, and it's like a Where's Waldo of
I was
weirdness.
Just thinking that. I was like, it's just like Where's Waldo? The Where's like a head and like a liver and like a pitchfork, like just weird, a whole bunch of stuff.
And when you look like what other people were drawing in that time period, nobody was doing stuff like that. So there's like a quote, and it's just a one sentence thing, but like as soon as I read it, I had to put the book down and be like, oh my God, do you see what he did there? It was like 10% into the book, I think it was like page 55, that all this wild abandon, worthy of Hieronymus Bosch, paled in comparison to the leader of the pack. And I'm just like, that is a heck of a way to describe someone. You want to tell me that someone is super weird? Tell me that Hieronymus Bosch stuff pales in comparison to them. The other thing that I very much liked about this was I kept trying to figure out, because I know we've had this history now of every book we've read. There's like one side character that's our like, oh, we love this side character. Oh my gosh. Like, I have too many side characters that I really like in this book.
I just want a whole story about Nell.
Nell. I definitely have questions about Nell, and I think actually we'll get some of that in the next book. I don't know if you guys have read the...
No, haven't read the synopsis.
I think for me, I really liked the ambassador.
That was what, Tatterdemalion?
No, so I like the spider web fae, the one that was teaching Ren how to fight. He was a little feisty, and I think he's got a story, and we didn't dive into that a lot. Although Tatterdemalion was super interesting. I'd like to see more of him.
Yeah, we got, I think, a lot of interesting teasing of these, kind of that whole building characters where you give a little bit of detail and it makes them seem so much more fleshed out and realistic, like the teasing about the spider fae being like somehow dishonorable, or like his family didn't like him and that's why he was there. The same thing with Nell. We got like this little teasing about, you know, the story with her brothers. Oh, it turns out she's maybe half fae, and oh, her brother still lives in the mortal realm, and oh, you know, apparently some stuff went down at one of the wild hunts that forged a big bond between Shrike and Nell. And, you know, so we're left with these, you know, questions of, well, what happened? What went down? I want to know.
Agreed.
It's an interesting thing because maybe it gives you more insight into some of the thoughts of the author. But one of the things that, you know, kept going on was Ren's relationship with his former friends, the rest of Quills, right? So there was a lot of play about how he used to be very much part of their group, and then they sort of had a falling out. Part of it was because, you know, he left university or whatever. And then, of course, we get more into the detail later, is that even though he had fallen out of the university, he was still pretty tight with them, and they appreciated his artwork up until he worked on this huge project of his own sort of illustration of Gawain and the Green Knight. Having taken some English literature classes many moons ago, Gawain and the Green Knight is a tale that's sometimes hotly debated about, you know, is there a element of homoeroticism in the tale of Gawain and the Green Knight? And so we turns to find out that his former buddies and the rest of Quills had all decided that no, Gawain and the Green Knight was not at all, there was no homoeroticism in it at all. And so that was kind of the big falling out period. And then what I thought was interesting was that Ren then goes on to talk about how his friends had changed, right, from their university days. As they had gotten older and gotten respectable jobs, they had become more rigid and conservative in their beliefs. And so that happens to most people, right? Like most people, the older they get, the more conservative their beliefs tend to be, right? What is the author saying? Is that something that the author is trying to say about society in general, and that has a role in it? But I think it's actually a very important part of the story itself, and part of the reason why the Fae realm is so much more attractive to Ren is because the people there are not as conservative, obviously, but also the idea that they're not going to get older and become conservative in their beliefs.
Yeah, it's an escape for him. Escape from like the judgment that has shaped his life up to that point.
Right, because that happens, right? As people and friends grow older, sometimes they grow apart, right? Because their life takes them in different direction.
Absolutely.
You know, like, or this was written not too long ago. Are we talking about how some of our own friends and family members have turned out to be much worse people than we thought they were because of the current political situation in the United States? We've seen the politics break apart friendships, break apart families.
Yeah. There's a quote where like Ren is talking about himself, and he says, and it kind of speaks to what we've just talked about. It says, this is Ren talking about himself. He says, "There's no measure to which I might dilute myself that will make my essence palatable to society."
Right, exactly. And that's the thing. You can't get around that the fact that the characters are homosexual or gay is a central part of the plot of the story. And I think it's very well included into the way the story was structured, that element was entwined in it very well. And I think it really highlighted, you know, the way things were going on at the time. And it also, you know, some of it's relevant even looking at it through the lens of today, like like we talked about with the finding out your friends are way more conservative or they've grown more conservative because of the way politics in this country have gone. Or even the idea he talks about how Felix, was a well-to-do, almost a dilettante, like, Ren said several times that, he could get away with womanizing and treating people badly, and society accepted him because of him being wealthy more than they would accept him. And that's like today, right? If you're rich, you can get away with anything. An interesting way to bring that into the story as well.
Yeah, lots of tangents. Yeah, I like the part where Shrike talks to the horse, to Rainscald the horse, and like convinces him to take them to where they think Felix is. And Rainscald is like, I'll do it for the sake of adventure. I'm like, all right.
Good sport.
Because it's interesting because you talked about how like Ren was this kind of ordinary, everyman kind of person and Shrike isn't. But I think in a lot of ways in the world of Fae, Shrike is. Shrike is just a knave. Like, okay, in our world, it's cool that he can, turn into a bird and use magic. But in the world of the Fae, he's not, it's kind of surprising that he got to where he's, to the level he's at.
Right. The biggest thing about Shrike is that apparently he was a very gifted leather worker, and a little bit of like a craftsman. He wasn't known for being able to fight very well, hunt very well, any of those things. In fact, the reason he entered the tournament was because he wanted to try and get himself elevated a little bit to like essentially a position of nobility within the Fae court. And man, that didn't go as he thought it was going to go, which is a great thing because one of the classic things about the Fae, especially when you talk about the Fae king and the Fae queen, is that how fickle they are, about how they do very, very fickle or petty things. So like her picking him
on a whim.
And even later, right, and even later, her scheming to pick Ren later as the replacement king to challenge Shrike is something very petty that a Fae queen would do. But not necessarily out of malice, just because she thinks it'll be more interesting.
Yeah, it'll be entertaining. And I think it's interesting that, like, when they are in Fae, so many of the Fae are, like, and Shrike himself is very, like, awed by the fact that Ren can write. Like, that's almost his superpower in the Fae world, is that he's literate.
Well, I mean, that still wasn't a very common thing in the 1800s for people to be literate. You were a learned person if you were literate.
I do like that they partnered up, and there was definitely there was passion, but there was also almost like a sense of courtship.
Yeah, like a flirtation.
I liked the Daniel plot twist.
Oh
Did
my gosh.
anybody see that coming? I didn't see that one coming.
No, not at all. I thought it was cool. That was well done.
And tasteful, right? Like, it wasn't forced. It blended in that part of the story. Like, her questions, to Mr. Grigsby and to Ren were very odd along the way. Mm-hmm. And I didn't get the sense that she was trying to help Felix. Not really. Maybe she was trying to get herself out of dealing with Felix any further than she already had. I really liked how her story panned out.
Me too. And it was foreshadowed. Like, it wasn't in your face. You're right. But like after it happens, you think back and you're like, yeah, it was leading up to it.
I honestly didn't expect the Bam, Felix is dead. Bam, the bones say he's not only is he not dead, he's no longer even on the earth, right? Like,
yeah, that was a little rushed for me.
I didn't expect a murder mystery twist in the middle of the book.
I agree.
What do you think the mindset was when they hit you with the plot twist to pit the two against each other? Like, once she...
Oh, I saw that coming.
Too.
I saw that coming as soon as the first time somebody said that the Fae Queen hadn't named the opponent yet. I was like, oh, she's going to name
just
him.
To mess with him.
Like, I mean, that's right, because I've read so much stuff, so many stories with Fae and the Fae Queens and how they're fickle and stuff like that. I was like, oh, that's obviously going to happen. Like, just because that's exactly what a Fae Queen would do.
I definitely saw that one coming as well. What I did not see coming was how they were going to resolve the issue was through, like, sex magic. I'm like, oh, sex magic was not on my bingo card. All right.
I think I was a little like, oh, this is going down in front of everyone. Like, there's no...
The exhibitionism of it.
Yeah.
But that was very much set up in that Fae world where it was, like, several places he went where it was, like, the exhibitionist was... Like, it happened out in the open. There was no sense of it being wrong or whatever.
Right, because we already had talk about, the Huldra. There wasn't a new concept, for sure.
Yeah, and I get that. For Ren, there was no sense of like, I'm trying to think of a good word for it. So it's like
That was a huge leap for him as a character to go from being in a world where he couldn't even talk about being gay to
Yeah.
doing it in front of a public audience.
yeah, for
Right.
being
So was that almost
socially
like
shamed.
that was
and
right. That was him casting off the last bit of being a person in the mortal realm. He was fully embraced being a
Yeah.
fae at that point.
oh, I like
Because
that.
I mean, even when he left, like he told, he said several times he had no intention of coming back after the midsummer. Right? He said that several times. Like there was no intention that he was ever coming back to
Either
the
way.
mortal world. Right? Either way.
It's true.
Yeah,
So that was like the final. That was like the final act of casting off that repressed mortal mindset and becoming a
Yeah.
fae.
Well, and it was his commitment too to the relationship, right?
Right.
He was essentially sacrificing that humanity part of himself. Not that maybe that's the wrong
Sacrificial?
terminology. Well, yeah, I think it was very symbolic on both sides of that coin. I think it was to save the person that he loves as well as himself. I mean, though I think he gladly would have died for Shrike.
Yeah.
There was a lot of symbolism in his courage to commit to the ceremony, both for the relationship and for their ability to survive.
Right. No, exactly. Good point.
All right. What about the cover? What do you guys think about the cover?
It was pretty.
I was not entertained.
It
Really?
didn't entertain
Dang.
you.
The cover didn't do.
It didn't speak
It didn't
to you.
speak to me. It just felt like the cover of a coloring book.
Oh,
Whoa.
big
Wow.
feelings.
Yeah, there were definitely some like
Yeah.
it didn't feel mature. It felt juvenile. It didn't. I don't see the connection through the story. I don't even like the font.
I like the font.
I hate the font.
Jeez.
But like I'm not, and this is like that. Don't judge a book by its cover.
Right. So how many paintbrushes would you give it? You can
One.
give it one. You can
I'll
give it a
give
little paint drop.
I'm gonna go low on that. Everything else is like high marks from me. And I don't know do we know who did the art?
Yeah, actually, so the illustration for it was done by Jan Falk, Falk, of Thistle Art Studio. And then the cover design was done by Kelly of Sleepy Fox Studio. So it was a collaboration.
Apologize to them for my very rude opinion. And that's what it's just the opinion of one person who didn't click with, and my bad, but it's not
It's not for you.
it's not the cover that's not my kind of cover. So
You are
That's all.
entitled to your
So the
opinion.
cover may not have been for you, but was the cover, how would you think it portrayed what was in the book, right? Because we're not doing...
I can't get past
The whole
it.
idea was we're not doing... You can't get past it? Okay.
It's like, yeah, once it shuts, like visually, when it shuts down on me, that's kind of like, y'all probably had different, I'm assuming, because the shock and awe, y'all probably had like a difference of opinion, which is, let's hear it. Bring it on. Who's going up?
Ash, what did you think?
I thought it was pretty. I don't think that it did anything extra, although now obviously reading it as an ebook, right? I didn't have the cover in front of me all the time. So as I look more into it, I really like the backdrop of it. I'm assuming that that's Shrike's home, right? And the briars and everything. So having read the story, I have more of an appreciation for it. It's probably the most fitting cover for a book that we've read to date. I think it's the most relevant cover for a book that we've read to date. So for that, I think it's super nice. I think it's polite. I thought Shrike would be taller. I don't see Ren's freckles. I have beef about that. So for that reason, it's a 3.5. I needed to see the bespeckling. There was so much talk about the bespeckled face of Ren, and I'm missing that on this. 3.5.
So for me, I thought the cover was a 5 all around. It caught my attention. It made me want to look more into the book. And also, I feel like it very much portrays the story of the book. I mean, it's got the two main characters in it. They're in an embrace. It's got this whole like uber romantic fairy tale vibes. I'm not super great with botany, but I'm pretty sure that the tree on the right is got holly on it with the red berries, and the tree on the left is an oak tree. You're like in front of some stone type building, which could be, Shrike's home. It's almost like if you take off the top part of the image and you just look like from their heads down, the left side is very gray, like it could almost be London. And then the right side is very green, like it could be Faye. The book cover drew me in, and after reading the book, I felt like it did a really good job of, going with the story. So for me, it was a 5. Kelly?
So I would say a 3.5. I think it was a very appropriate for representing kind of what was going to be in the book. I think there were some good elements, like there was an oak tree, there was a holly tree. I don't know that it's one side was gray like London as much as it's supposed to be more like on Ren's side, it's a wintry background and like snow underfoot. So because he was the winter king, and on Shrike's side, it's more spring and summery because he was the summer king. But I think, it's one of those things where I think the cover looked good. I think it represented things well. It could have been better. It could have been worse. But overall, I think it did a good job. And so I think a 3.5 is a pretty good rating for it.
Right. Are we ready for the hard question? Is it a kissing book?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. 100% in agreement.
Finally.
Oh, do we have any rapid fires today?
How long do we want to do? Like a minute for each person?
Oh, I've got a timer set. We're going to do each of us get 1 minute to give our incredibly brief and their yes or no in our incredibly brief support. We're going to rapid fire the Knight's Tale, starting with Mari. Mari,
All right.
go.
To me, Knight's Tale is absolutely... It's actually romance for sure. I would say it's probably romantasy because it's this the fantasy of like a peasant being able to make it to the knighthood. But romance, yes, it's like this sibling or friendship romance. There's a little bit of love story in it too that kind of drives him. It's the romantic idea of being a knight. Yes, absolutely.
So we'll switch over to Ashley. Ashley, you have 1 minute.
I definitely agree with the romance. I'm struggling with the fantasy part of it outside of the ideals that you mentioned, right? The wanting to climb to a higher station, to achieve more, to do better. It's a great story. It's very certainly a rom-com, for which I'm a fan. The romantasy part, it's a kissing book, but I don't know that it's romantasy for me.
Okay. Jonathan, you have 1 minute.
Ooh, on the clock. No, I don't think it's a kissing book. Here's why. I think it's the Saved by the Bell of a fake and bakes, right? So like you're just like Zach Morris gets busted before the second commercial break, and then everything comes back together in the end. So that's a no for me, dog. What'd you think, Kelly?
It is absolutely not a kissing book, and the reason why is because Heath Ledger's character does not enter those jousting tournaments with the intention of wooing somebody, right? Initially, that may seem what he's doing, but he's all about competition. He's about winning. He's about proving his rival that he's a better knight than him and all that kind of stuff. So that was going to happen whether or not there was a romance between him and the princess or whoever it was in that movie. It's been so long, I forget. The only real romance that was worth anything in that was the bromance going on between the characters. So I would say no, it is not a kissing book.
And there we have it. Rapid fire, Knight's Tale.
I like it. That was pretty rapid.
It might have been our most rapid.
We've been lucky enough to be able to interview Sebastian Nothwell, author of Oak King, Holly King, and we will be releasing that as a separate bonus episode. So subscribe so you can get it. Thanks for listening to Of Swords and Soulmates. Before we go, make sure to check out the show notes, rate and review us on your podcast app of choice, and follow us on Instagram at Of Swords and Soulmates, or join our Facebook page Of Swords and Soulmates, or come visit our newly set up website of swordsandsoulmates.com. Probably the easiest place to find everything. You'll see our episode pages on there. You'll see our little bios, and you'll see a little bit about our rating system. If you'd like to offer a suggestion for a future rapid fire question, you can reach out to us on any of these methods. And if you'd like to read along with us as we prepare for next episode, you can follow us on Goodreads at Of Swords and Soulmates, when we will be reading The Last Storm by J.D. Linton, Linton. We hope you'll join us in 2 weeks for our next episode.